At 6:45 a.m., while steam rose from the kitchen sink, Elena noticed a sealed envelope tucked beneath her husband's ration book, an envelope stamped with an office she had never heard him mention. She paused with her hand still wet, water collecting at her wrist. The window over the stove reflected only the dim blue of early light, offering nothing else to interpret. The envelope lay partly concealed, as if placed in haste, its edge slightly bent. She looked toward the corridor. The apartment remained quiet, except for the groan of the radiator. Mikhail's coat hung from the peg beside the door, still heavier than usual when she had lifted it earlier to sweep under it. She had told herself it was the weight of winter fabric. She told herself many such things lately. She dried her hand on the apron and lifted the ration book. The envelope shifted with a faint rasp, the paper thicker than household correspondence. The stamped marking was a narrow rectangle, the ink a muted red. She traced the unfamiliar office name with her thumb, careful not to smudge it, though she did not know why she felt the need for such care. A floorboard creaked. Mikhail stepped into the doorway, fastening the top button of his shirt. His eyes went immediately to her hands. "You're up early?" he said, voice steady, though his fingers hesitated on the second button. "I couldn't sleep," she replied. She set the ration book down deliberately, the envelope still visible beneath it. "You left this out." He crossed the kitchen, quietly picked up the book, and slid the envelope deeper under it with a motion so quick she almost doubted she had seen it. He did not look at her. "Just work," he said. "They sent it late." She studied the way he kept his gaze on the window, as though the frost pattern there demanded examination. He rarely brought work papers home. When he did, they were plain unmarked. Not like this. Not something he felt compelled to hide so completely. He moved to the counter, poured hot water into his cup. The steam curled around his face, softening the lines near his temples. "You should rest more," he added. "You look tired." Elena folded the dishcloth slowly, each corner aligned. "You came home late. Factory needed me. Night shift was short." His statements had become shorter over the past month, less anchored. Often delivered without any grounding detail, no names, no machines failing, no supervisor remarks. A practiced vagueness. She opened the cupboard to place the cloth inside, though it did not belong there. A small misplacement, almost symbolic. She closed the door and let the silence settle. A light scrape sounded from the hallway. Elena glanced through the kitchen doorway and saw Mrs. Kornilova standing in the open stairwell with her scarf half tied, pretending to adjust the knot. The neighbor's eyes lingered on their door long enough to suggest she had been there moments before listening. Mikhail noticed too. His spine straightened. "She always wanders this early," he muttered. Elena did not answer. She moved to the window instead, pulling the curtain slightly. The courtyard below was still empty, the snow unmarked. Routine was usually a comfort to her kettle-on child's school bag, packed Mikhail leaving at the same hour. But the envelope had broken the pattern. It sat now inside Mikhail's coat pocket. She had heard the faint crackle when he slipped it in. "Don't wait for me tonight," he said suddenly. She turned. "Will it be another late shift?" He reached for the coat. Something like that. As he lifted it from the hook, a slip of paper fell lightly to the floor, its corner sharp, its texture similar to the envelope's. He bent to retrieve it faster than she could react, but not before she glimpsed printed lines arranged in a grid, numbers crossed out in 2 columns. The paper disappeared into his hand before she could make sense of it. He opened the door. Cold air swept in briefly. "I'll be home when I can," he said. She watched him descend the steps. At the landing, Mrs. Kornilova stepped aside, her expression unreadable. She waited until he passed, then turned her face toward Elena, offering a faint, ambiguous nod, one that carried neither greeting nor warmth, but something closer to confirmation of what Elena could not yet decide. When the door closed, she approached the hook where the coat had hung. The air still held its warmth. She touched the empty peg, then looked at the ration book on the table, now lying perfectly flat, envelope hidden. For the first time, she wondered whether the envelope was meant to be hidden from her or from someone else. She picked up the ration book. The envelope was gone. Elena anchored herself in the quiet of the apartment after Mikhail left, letting the familiar morning stillness settle. She wiped the counter slowly, as if ordinary motion might restore the routine that had fractured the moment she noticed the envelope. The radiator clicked once, then fell silent again. She listened closely, half expecting another shift in the floorboards, some indication that the morning's tension had not entirely exited with Mikhail. In the bedroom, she opened the wardrobe to gather laundry. As she reached for a folded shirt at the back, her hand brushed the uneven panel at the base of the wardrobe wall. She had noticed the looseness before, but attributed it to age. This time, she pressed the edge. The panel lifted slightly. A narrow space revealed itself, a cavity not large enough for clothing but wide enough for someone to store something deliberately. Inside lay a small wooden drawer, not part of the furniture. It contained a stack of neatly folded documents and atop them a photograph. Elena lifted it carefully. The image showed Mikhail standing outdoors with two unfamiliar men. Snow covered the ground. An iron fence behind them cast sharp shadows. The men wore ordinary coats, but their posture suggested formation rather than friendship. The back of the photograph bore a faint marking, a series of letters and numbers arranged diagonally written in pencil. They did not resemble dates. She placed the photograph on the bed and unfolded the top document from the drawer. A household expense sheet, one she had prepared 2 months earlier, showed 3 additional items handwritten in a script not her own. She compared the handwriting to Mikhail's, recalling birthday cards, grocery lists, notes he left near the door. The letters on the sheet were more angular, rushed. Someone else had annotated their expenses. A soft thud came from the hallway. Elena froze. The apartment door opened, then closed. She exhaled when her daughter's footsteps crossed the entryway. "Mama," the girl called, still removing her boots. "In here," Elena replied, sliding the document back into the drawer and easing the loose panel into place. Her daughter stepped into the room, rubbing her eyes with one hand, school bag hanging from the other. "I heard voices last night," she said. "You and Papa weren't talking, but someone else was." Elena knelt to adjust the girl's scarf. "Where did you hear them?" In the kitchen, the girl whispered. "Late, before Papa came home." Elena kept her hands steady. "What kind of voices?" "A man." "Not Papa." The girl's voice carried no fear, only observation. Children often reported what adults ignored. Elena finished tying the scarf. "Sometimes the neighbors speak loudly. The walls are thin." The girl nodded, accepting the explanation without conviction, and went to the kitchen to retrieve her lunch tin. Elena remained kneeling beside the bed for a moment longer, listening again for the echo of what her daughter described. When the girl left for school, Elena returned to the photograph. She studied Mikhail's expression in the image, composed forward-facing, not quite smiling. A shadow crossed the lower part of the frame, possibly the photographer's sleeve. She lifted the picture closer to the window, letting pale winter light reveal the surface grain. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Not recently worn wood, this was a sound shaped by weight. Elena set the photograph on the bed and stepped into the hall. Mikhail stood there. He shouldn't have been home. His coat was still on, dusted lightly with frost, as though he had only pretended to leave that morning. His eyes flicked past her toward the bedroom. "I forgot something," he said, tone steady but breath slightly quickened. "What did you forget?" "Work papers." She held still, not blocking the doorway but not stepping aside either. Mikhail moved past her, opened the wardrobe, and reached directly for the loose panel without searching, without hesitation. He removed the drawer, checked its contents, and slid it back. The photograph remained on the bed. He noticed immediately. "You were looking through my things," he said. "You hid them in the wall. They're work-related. The angle of his posture, not defensive, not aggressive, felt more like containment. He picked up the photograph, turned it face down, and held it between two fingers. "You shouldn't disturb this," he said quietly. "Who are they?" Elena asked. He did not answer. He only replaced the photograph in the drawer and pressed the panel shut firmly as though sealing a compartment that was never meant to be accessed by the ordinary rhythms of their home. He stepped back toward the hallway. "I have to go," he said. "Lock the door behind me." She followed him to the threshold. His shoes left faint wet impressions on the parquet. A few seconds after he exited, Elena opened the door again. Down the stairwell, Mrs. Kornilova was already watching again, too near again, without speaking. The neighbor's gaze dropped to Elena's hands as though checking whether she held anything new. Elena closed the door quietly. The committee's visit began with a knock too soft to signal urgency, yet too deliberate to ignore. Elena checked the clock, 10:18 a.m., an hour when most neighbors were at work and officials preferred unannounced appearances. She smoothed her skirt before opening the door. 3 members of the housing committee stood in the stairwell, their coats dripping melted snow onto the landing. At the front was the chairwoman, a woman with a narrow face and a wool brooch pinned precisely at her collar. Elena recognized the other 2 as residents from the opposite building. They held clipboards. "Routine household verification," the chairwoman said, stepping forward without waiting for invitation. Elena moved aside, the apartment filled with the muted scrape of boots and the rustling of papers. The chairwoman walked directly to the kitchen table, placing a folder upon it. Elena noticed the red thread binding the folder, a color rarely used for ordinary matters. "Your husband," the chairwoman said, flipping a form open. "We need clarification on his work hours for the month of January." Elena folded her hands. "You should speak to him. He is at the factory." "Yes," the woman replied calmly, though the factory states he has not been on their night roster for several weeks. Elena's breath held still. One of the assistants passed her a form. The page showed a grid of dates and hours, several of which had been underlined twice in blue pencil. The times marked did not match what Mikhail had told her home late, claiming extended shifts. She traced the lines with the tip of her finger, the paper cool and stiff. "This seems incorrect," Elena said. "We confirm only what is provided to us," the chairwoman replied. "If there is an inconsistency, the household may need to submit supporting documentation." Supporting documentation. Elena had heard the phrase before. Neighbors spoke of it after inspections, after disagreements, after whispered complaints in the courtyard. The second committee member moved through the living room, noting objects opening drawers without comment. He paused at the wardrobe but did not touch the loose panel. Instead, he wrote something quietly and continued. Elena tried to observe discreetly, but the chairwoman watched her watching. "You seem unsettled, Comrade Elena." "It's unexpected," she replied. "Unexpected visits ensure accuracy," the woman said without judgment. She flipped another sheet. "These discrepancies, your husband's hours on the 4th, the 11th, and the 17th. Do you have explanations?" Elena kept her gaze on her clasped hands. "He told me he was needed at the factory." The chairwoman nodded as though Elena had confirmed something already known. "We have received mixed information," from whom Elena asked quietly. The woman did not answer. Instead, she closed the folder and slid it into her bag. "We will return if clarification is necessary." The 2 assistants finished their quiet inspection. They stepped back into the hallway. The chairwoman lingered. "You should speak with your husband," she said. "It is better when the household provides consistent accounts." The phrasing felt rehearsed polite but edged. The stairwell light flickered once, then steadied. When the committee members descended the stairs, Mrs. Kornilova emerged from her apartment door across the landing as though responding to some signal. She held a small trash bin, though she did not walk toward the chute. Instead, she asked, "Everything in order?" Elena nodded. "Routine." "Of course," the neighbor said. Her eyes drifted toward the interior of Elena's apartment, scanning as though checking for some visible shift. "They've been quite thorough lately." Elena closed the door, the latch clicking with more finality than usual. She leaned against the wood briefly, then returned to the kitchen table where the form had rested. Though taken back by the committee, the shape of it lingered in her memory. Dates, crossed-out times, rewritten each alteration, suggesting someone had reviewed Mikhail's schedule long before she had questioned it herself. The room felt colder now. The radiator's warmth seemed unable to expand beyond its metal frame. Elena placed her hand on the table. The faint imprint left by the committee's folder, an impression in dust, marked the surface. A small temporary shadow of bureaucracy. She wiped it away mechanically, though the unease remained. From the window, she saw Mrs. Kornilova returning inside, closing her door with exaggerated care. Elena watched until the hallway emptied. She turned back toward the bedroom, toward the concealed panel in the wardrobe. If the committee returned again, they might not overlook it. For now, she needed to understand the inconsistencies herself before others explained them for her. By mid-afternoon, the tension from the committee visit still clung to the apartment like a film on the windows. Elena dressed for the cold and stepped outside, telling herself she would only deliver a document to Mikhail's workplace, one of the routine forms he had left unfinished on the kitchen shelf last week. A harmless errand. But the truth pressed harder. She needed to see for herself what explanation the factory might offer. Snow had settled unevenly along the path leading to the tram stop. Her boots left clear prints, the pattern of the soles distinct enough that anyone following could identify her path. She caught herself glancing back once, then dismissed the impulse. Paranoia, she told herself, though the word felt imprecise. It was not fear of being followed, but of misunderstanding what was already present. The factory gate stood open, a metal frame that hummed faintly in the wind. Inside, workers moved with the muted efficiency of people accustomed to being observed. Elena approached the reception window where a man in a gray uniform stamped documents without lifting his head. "I'm looking for my husband," she said. "Mikhail Arsenyev." The clerk blinked slowly, then reached for a ledger. "Your name, Elena Arsenyeva." He flipped through pages covered with handwritten times and initials. "Arsenyev," he murmured. "Let me check the visitor log." He retrieved a narrow book from beneath the counter and placed it between them. The binding was worn, the edges smudged from frequent handling. He opened it to the current month. Rows of entries filled the page columns for names, arrival times, departure times, and purpose. Elena scanned the entries, searching for Mikhail's name. She found it on several days, but the marked hours contradicted what he had told her entries as late as 02:10. Others at 04:55, and some with no departure recorded. Several lines near his entries bore faint erasure marks, graphite remnants clinging to the fibers of the paper. These times, she said quietly, they don't reflect his shifts. The clerk cleared his throat. "I log what I receive. What does that mean?" He closed the book slightly as though shielding it. "Sometimes entries are amended, sometimes not. I'm not authorized to explain." The erasure's thin, uneven patches caught the overhead light. Someone had attempted to remove or adjust information. The clerk's refusal to elaborate suggested the alterations were known, perhaps even expected. Elena pointed to an entry from 3 nights earlier. This line. "Why is it overwritten?" The man adjusted his glasses. It was corrected. By whom he hesitated a fraction too long. Internal oversight. She absorbed the answer without revealing her reaction. "I brought him a document," she said, placing the form on the counter. "Where can I leave it?" The clerk motioned toward a small metal tray. "Here. It will be routed." A voice rose from behind the partition, 2 men conversing. The words were indistinct, but one phrase drifted clear through the opening in the glass. "His section is shifting protocols." Elena turned slightly, listening without appearing to. A second voice responded, lower tense. "Should have kept the night entries clean." The clerk noticed her posture and slid the window shut with a muted clack. She stepped back from the counter, hands clasped. The faint hum of machinery deeper in the building contrasted with the tight administrative quiet at the entrance. Information existed here, too much of it altered, too much concealed. As she exited the factory grounds, she paused near the fence. Frost glimmered on the metal mesh. She watched the entrance for a moment longer, then turned toward the tram stop. Across the street, a figure stood near the kiosk. Mrs. Kornilova, half hidden by the kiosk wall scarf, tied tightly, posture composed. Their eyes met briefly. The neighbor gave no wave, no acknowledgement, only the smallest narrowing of her gaze, as though confirming a pattern she had been tracking. Elena walked past without altering her pace, though her pulse tightened. If the committee had inconsistencies, if the log held erased entries, if the neighbor watched, then something larger had been in motion long before the envelope appeared beneath the ration book. When she reached the tram platform, she opened her handbag to check the household forms. The compartment where she had stored the unfinished document now lay empty. The clerk had taken it. But beneath the lining where seams met the fabric, she felt a crisp shape. She withdrew a scrap of paper no larger than a ticket stub. It bore a number and a date crossed out in the same angular handwriting she had seen on the hidden expense sheet. Someone, whether Mikhail or another, had placed it there without her noticing. The apartment felt different when Elena returned still, but with the kind of stillness that follows intrusion. She locked the door quietly and set her gloves on the table. Light filtered through the curtains in thin, angled lines marking the dust in the air. She listened for any sign that someone had entered in her absence, but the rooms offered nothing. No displaced chair, no unfamiliar scent, no indentation along the carpet edge. Yet something was wrong. She walked to the bedroom and opened the wardrobe. The loose panel remained flush, though now it lay too perfectly aligned, as though someone unfamiliar with the flaw had pushed it closed deliberately without the natural ease of someone who lived with the furniture. Elena knelt and pressed the edge. The panel lifted with the faintest crackle. Inside the drawer looked untouched at first glance. She lifted it out slowly, feeling for any shift in weight. The photograph she had seen earlier was still there. But beneath it, the documents had been rearranged, straightened into an order she did not remember creating. She checked the floorboard beside the wardrobe. A soft scuff mark curved along the wood, fresh enough that it still held granular traces of grit from the stairwell. Someone who had not removed their shoes had entered this room. Elena's breath eased out in a shallow exhale. She stood scanning the floor until her attention caught on a slight lift at the corner of a rug near the radiator. She slid the rug aside. Beneath it lay a patch of flooring she had never examined closely. The boards here met unevenly, one edge slanting. She pressed down. A section of wood shifted. Elena crouched and lifted the board carefully. Beneath it was a narrow recess containing a small metal box, cool to the touch despite the apartment's heat. Its edges were blunt, the hinges plain, the surface unmarked except for faint scratches near the latch. She opened it. Inside lay 3 film negatives rolled tightly and secured with twine and a torn slip of paper bearing symbols rather than letters, neat strokes arranged in columns, nothing she recognized as language. The negatives were brittle at the edges, suggesting handling, not storage. One negative rolled slightly and revealed a fragment of an image, 2 men in a courtyard, one handing something to the other. In the corner of the frame, the shadow of a building Elena recognized their own. She held the negative up toward the window. The light sharpened the silhouettes. The same iron railing from the old photograph. The same posture of formal exchange. The floorboard behind her creaked softly. Elena lowered her hand slowly, letting the negative curl back into its coil. She turned her head, careful not to move too abruptly. The apartment remained still, but the sound had not been imagined. Someone had stepped on the hallway boards just lightly enough to let intention blur with coincidence. Elena returned the negatives to the box, closing the lid with controlled pressure. She replaced the floorboard, aligning it along its original groove. She slid the rug back over it, smoothing the corner with her palm. A second sound followed, not inside the room this time, but just outside the apartment door. A faint scrape like a shoe adjusting for balance. Then silence. She waited. After several seconds, the stairwell door at the end of the hallway opened with its familiar soft whine. She stepped into the hallway and looked toward it. Mrs. Kornilova was descending the stairs, gloved hand resting lightly on the railing. She did not turn, did not speak, did not acknowledge Elena's presence. But her posture, straight-backed, measured, carried the quiet composure of someone who had confirmed something for herself. Elena closed the apartment door and locked it again. She leaned against the wood, listening to the fading footsteps below. Only then did she notice a thin trail of grit near the bedroom door, granular pale identical to what she had seen on the scuffed floorboard beneath the wardrobe. Someone had entered. Someone had moved through the rooms carefully. Someone had known where to look. And now Elena realized someone knew what she had found. Mrs. Kornilova heard the soft click of Elena's lock, a sound that carried easily across the narrow landing. She did not linger outside her own door. Such behavior attracted attention. Instead, she waited a measured interval before stepping into the hallway with a folded shawl draped over her arm, as though she intended to shake dust from it over the stairwell rail. She descended one flight, then paused at the landing, adjusting the shawl without urgency. Through the thin walls, she could hear the shift of weight inside Elena's apartment, measured steps, not wandering ones. Someone searching, perhaps, or someone deciding what to do with what they had found. Mrs. Kornilova continued downward until she reached the dim communal storage alcove beside the courtyard entrance. She set the shawl on a pipe and waited. A few minutes later, footsteps approached Elena's lighter and more tentative than usual. When Elena reached the bottom of the stairs, Mrs. Kornilova stepped into view. "You're out early," Elena said. Mrs. Kornilova gestured to the shawl. "Dust collects everywhere, even in winter." Her tone remained even, with neither warmth nor accusation. She indicated the bench near the alcove. "Sit a moment." Elena hesitated, but she sat. The older woman lowered herself beside her hands, folded neatly atop the shawl. "You've noticed changes in your husband's behavior," she said, not as a question, but as an established fact. Elena drew her coat tighter. "You seem certain. I observe patterns. It is my role in the committee, but I do not report everything I see." She paused. "Only what concerns the household's stability." Elena kept her gaze on the courtyard where the wind pushed a thin line of snow across the stones. Mrs. Kornilova opened her handbag and withdrew a thin sheet of paper, its edges rippled slightly from repeated handling. "The committee keeps copies of previous inquiries," she said. "This one notes irregularities from last year. Your husband's name appears." Elena accepted the paper with careful fingertips. The sheet held a witness statement typed in stiff, uneven lines. Some passages had been redacted with black strokes. One section remained visible. Subject maintains inconsistent explanations regarding overnight absences. Another line, household unaware of professional obligations. Elena folded the sheet once, sharply. "Who filed this?" Mrs. Kornilova met her eyes without flinching. "I did." Elena's breath tightened, though her expression remained composed. "Why?" "Because the pattern had begun." The woman's voice was not unkind. Night entries without corresponding factory assignments. visitors arriving at hours when only official couriers travel, and he protected his pockets too carefully when passing through the stairwell. "You thought he was hiding something," Elena said. The older woman exhaled slowly, forming a small cloud in the cold air. "I thought the family deserved to know what direction the winds were shifting, and the committee needed clarity before rumors took hold." She paused, adjusting the shawl again. "I never accused him of wrongdoing. I only documented facts." Elena looked down at the witness statement. The paper felt light, but carried an unmistakable weight. "Why tell me this now?" "Because the committee's visit this morning signals escalation," Mrs. Kornilova replied. "They do not send 3 officers unless the matter has already reached a threshold." She lowered her voice. "They asked me last night if I had seen anyone enter your apartment while your husband was away." Elena stilled. "And what did you say I said I had not?" Her answer came with no dramatics, no expectation of gratitude, merely a statement of what she had chosen. A gust of wind swept through the alcove, rattling the metal grate near the courtyard. Elena tucked the statement into her coat out of sight. Mrs. Kornilova continued, "The committee will return. They always do when the paperwork does not align." She glanced toward the stairwell. "And in this case, several papers do not align." Elena looked toward the second-floor windows of their building, the glass rectangles reflecting a washed-out gray sky. "What should I expect?" The older woman hesitated, then answered, "They will focus on inconsistencies. They will ask for cooperation. They will imply you already know more than you have admitted." She stood lifting the shawl, "and they will behave as though the conclusion has already been formed." Elena rose as well. "Tell me plainly," she said. "Does the committee believe my husband is involved in something beyond the factory?" Mrs. Kornilova considered her quietly. "They believe," she said, "that his duties extend beyond what he declares at home, and they believe the household should prepare for whatever follows." She stepped back toward the stairs, her posture neither triumphant nor apologetic, simply resolved. "If they question you again, answer carefully. They will search for the smallest contradiction." As she ascended, Elena stood motionless in the alcove, the witness statement's folded edge pressing against her coat lining. The courtyard wind shifted. A piece of loose snow lifted, drifted, and vanished. Above her, the stairwell door shut with a muted click, final echoing and unmistakably official in tone. Elena waited until evening, when the corridors grew quiet and the neighbors settled into the muted rhythms of cooking and radio broadcasts. She carried the small metal box in her handbag wrapped in a scarf so its corners would not clink against anything. She left the apartment without turning on the hall light, descending each step with deliberate care. The stairwell air held a faint draft, the kind that seeped through old walls and carried distant echoes from the courtyard. She crossed the courtyard quickly, head lowered, and made her way to the building behind theirs, the one with a basement laundry room no longer used since the machines had broken the previous year. The room still had a functioning sink and a long table where residents once sorted linens. It was quiet there and, more importantly, rarely visited. Inside, she closed the door and locked it. The dim bulb overhead flickered but held steady enough for her purpose. She placed the scarf on the table, unwrapped the box, and removed the tightly rolled negatives. They curled naturally in her hand, their edges stiff, the images faint and cold. She set up the small portable viewer she kept from her years working at a school office, a simple magnifier with a backlight. It wasn't proper equipment, but enough to examine the film. When the bulb inside warmed, she fed the first negative across its surface. The light revealed a courtyard hearse. The slope of the roofline, the angle of the drainpipe, the familiar cracked paving stones. 2 figures stood near the entrance, Mikhail and another man partially obscured by a shadow. Mikhail held an envelope. The other man held out his hand. Their heads were turned slightly away, their expressions unreadable. Elena leaned closer. The figure with Mikhail wore a coat without insignia, but something about his posture, controlled expectant, suggested a practiced role. Behind him, barely visible, was the outline of a third person positioned as if watching the exchange from a distance. She advanced the negative by a few millimeters. The next frame captured the moment after the exchange, the man pocketing the envelope, Mikhail stepping back as if completing a routine gesture rather than a secretive one. Elena's eyes drifted to the far right edge of the frame, where a small smudge of movement suggested someone passing the stairwell window at the moment the shutter clicked. She recognized the silhouette, Mrs. Kornilova, not watching from afar, present. Elena set the negative down, inhaling calmly through her nose. The laundry room's cold air helped steady her. She inserted the second negative into the viewer. This frame showed a different location, an alley she did not recognize. Mikhail again, this time standing closer to the camera. He looked slightly younger, his hair shorter. A different man stood beside him, one she had never seen. In the background, a boarded window, a stack of crates, and faint chalk markings on a wall. The markings resembled the strokes on the torn slip of paper she had found in the metal box. She advanced the film. Another exchange. Another envelope. The same controlled formality. A sound reached her soft footsteps outside the laundry room door. Elena switched off the backlight immediately. The bulb cooled with a faint ping. She remained still. The footsteps paused, then continued down the hallway, echoing lightly before fading. She turned the light back on and fed the third negative across the viewer. This one captured the shadowed interior of what seemed like a storage shed. A wooden table, a lamp turned low. Mikhail seated with his back partially to the camera. Across from him sat a man whose face was turned away. Papers lay between them. On the table's edge was a small metal cylinder, perhaps a recording device or a container. But what caught Elena's attention was a detail in the bottom corner of the frame, a familiar marking, the diagonal letters and numbers that had appeared on the old photograph she had found in the wardrobe drawer. The marking connected these images to that earlier hidden past. She leaned back, folding her hands. The negatives formed a pattern, repeated meetings, precise exchanges, a consistent visual language. Nothing spontaneous, nothing careless. And someone had developed earlier sets of these images before images that had found their way into their home, into drawers, boxes, and walls. A draft moved under the laundry room door, stirring a loose thread on the scarf. Elena reached to turn off the viewer, but paused when her eye caught the faintest shape on the far edge of the final frame, a fragment of a face reflected in a small window pane. The angle was distorted, but the cheek line, the slope of the brow, Mikhail had not been alone. Someone inside that shed had documented him while someone else outside had photographed him. 2 vantage points. Coordinated. She turned off the viewer. As she rolled the negatives carefully and returned them to the box, footsteps approached again, this time stopping directly outside. A shadow passed beneath the door. Elena held her breath. After a long moment, the shadow receded. The footsteps faded. The hallway fell silent once more. She wrapped the box in the scarf and exited through the courtyard door instead of the stairwell. The air smelled faintly of coal smoke. As she crossed to her building, she saw a curtain shift in Mrs. Kornilova's window, barely but unmistakably timed to her movement. The box felt heavier in her hands now, not because its contents had changed, but because she understood what the images implied. The photographs were not simply records. They were reports. Elena woke before dawn, not from noise, but from the absence of it. The apartment felt suspended, no radiator ticking, no pipes, shifting only a dense quiet that pressed against the walls. She dressed without turning on the lights and moved into the hallway. A faint, unfamiliar draft curled under the front door. She placed her hand near the frame. Someone had opened the door recently, long enough for cold to settle, short enough for it still to linger. She checked the locks. The latch sat slightly off its usual angle. She straightened it and stepped back. By 8:00 a.m., when the courtyard began to fill with the muffled movement of residents heading to work, a sharp knock broke the stillness. Not the hesitant courtesy of neighbors, not the uncertain tap of couriers. A measured knock. 3 beats. Elena opened the door. The housing committee stood there again this time with only 2 representatives, but both carried thicker folders. The chairwoman met Elena's eyes with the same practiced neutrality. "We require a supplemental review," she said, stepping forward. The previous documentation revealed discrepancies. Elena moved aside. The committee entered without examining the coat rack or the entry table, moving instead directly to the dining area. One placed a folder on the table, the other removed a clipboard with meticulous slowness. The chairwoman opened the folder. Inside lay a household inventory sheet, one Elena recognized as her own handwriting. But several entries had been altered, quantities, corrected items, crossed out one line, rewritten completely. She looked closer. "This is not my version." "It is the version on file," the chairwoman replied. Elena kept her expression still. "Then someone updated it without telling me." "We document only what we receive," the woman said, echoing the line Elena had heard from the factory clerk. The assistant moved through the living room, checking the wardrobe, the kitchen drawers, the shelves above the stove. Elena watched his hands, controlled, deliberate. He did not open the concealed panel, but he paused near it as if sensing the irregularity, even if unaware of the mechanism. The chairwoman continued. "There is a mismatch between your reporting and your husband's declared household contributions. We request clarification." Elena folded her arms lightly. "What contributions?" "Payments," the woman said. "Repairs, supplemental inspection fees, items your husband claims to have provided." Elena's hands tightened slightly, though she kept them relaxed at her sides. "He made no such payments. That is the inconsistency." The assistant returned and handed the chairwoman a second sheet, another form, its edges lightly weathered. Elena recognized it immediately. The back bore faint marks from years of storage. A line near the top read, "Household acknowledges contributions per security protocol." Elena had never seen it before. The chairwoman spoke calmly. "The records do not match each other, nor do they match your husband's statements." "What statements?" Elena asked. The woman closed the folder. "He has provided information in previous cycles. Some of it contradicts what you have affirmed today." Elena swallowed once, keeping her breath steady. Mikhail had answered questions long before she realized anything required questioning. The committee was not uncovering new inconsistencies. It was revealing a structure she had not known existed. The assistant approached the doorway. "We will need access again within the week," he said. "It would be best if both household adults were present." Elena nodded once. "I understand." The committee gathered their papers. As they moved toward the door, the chairwoman paused. "Cooperation is important," she said. "When households provide aligned information, matters remain internal." The implications sat heavy between them. When the stairwell fell silent again, Elena closed the door and leaned against it. The room felt colder than before. She walked back to the table and examined the altered inventory sheet. The handwriting was similar to hers, but not identical, each loop slightly narrower, each number written with a sharper angle. Someone had imitated her script. She folded the sheet and placed it inside a drawer. The edges trembled faintly against the wood. In the bedroom, she reached beneath the rug to ensure the metal box still lay beneath the floorboard. It was there intact, untouched. But when she lowered the board back into place, she noticed a thin streak of chalk-like dust along its edge. She brushed it away with her sleeve. A sound drifted in from outside. From the window, she saw her daughter standing in the courtyard after school, scarf loose around her neck. The girl looked toward their building entrance, then upward toward the stairwell windows. She didn't move for a long moment. Elena descended to meet her. When the girl reached her, she asked softly, "Why were those committee people here again?" Elena touched her shoulder. They needed more information. The girl looked past her toward the rows of apartments. They were talking about Papa last time. Are they talking about him again? Elena did not answer. She opened the building door for her daughter, guiding her inside. Upstairs, as the hallway light flickered overhead, Elena hesitated before stepping into their apartment. There on the floor, just beneath the doorframe, lay a small, folded slip of paper, blank on one side. She turned it over. On the reverse were the same symbols she had seen on the torn note in the hidden box, repeated 3 times darker with each iteration, as though written recently or urgently. Someone wanted her to see this. Someone wanted her to understand that the administrative scrutiny was no longer merely an inquiry. It was preparation. The apartment was dark when Mikhail entered, the kind of darkness that suggested someone had stood in the doorway before him, letting the cold seep inside before closing it again. He paused to listen. No footsteps, no clatter of dishes, no radio murmuring in the background. He slipped off his gloves and held them in one hand. His breath formed a brief cloud before dissolving. He moved down the hall, careful not to disturb the floorboards that creaked most readily. Elena had learned their patterns over the years, and tonight he preferred his presence to remain indistinct. In the bedroom, the wardrobe door stood half open, though he distinctly recalled closing it that morning. He did not touch the wardrobe. Not yet. Instead, he sat at the small writing desk near the window, an old piece inherited from Elena's father, its surface etched with faint circles left by long-gone teacups. He slid the drawer open, removing a single sheet of coarse paper and a pencil trimmed to half its length. For several seconds, he held the pencil over the page without writing. Then he began. Not a confession in full, he knew the risks of clarity too well. Instead, a coded account, a sequence of abbreviated names, half-dates, a reference to the courtyard meetings, and a fragment of an instruction he had received years earlier. He kept the strokes small, angled the way he had been taught. Halfway down the page, he stopped. The pencil hovered. He could hear Elena's routines in his mind, setting the kettle on the stove, folding their daughter's scarf, adjusting the curtains at dusk. Routines he had relied upon even as he drifted further from the framework of their life. Routines she still maintained even now, when the distance between them had grown quiet but tangible. He tore the page in half. The upper portion he folded twice and slipped into the inside pocket of his coat. The lower half he set on the desk, weighing it with the pencil. Not meant to be found immediately, but not meant to disappear either. Something between a record and a warning. He stood and crossed the room to the wardrobe. The concealed panel sat slightly misaligned only by a millimeter, but enough for someone trained to notice. Elena had looked here again, perhaps more than once. He lifted the panel. The drawer inside was in order, though the edges of the photograph were marginally out of alignment. He replaced it without adjusting anything further. To correct the disorder too quickly would only confirm what Elena already suspected. As he lowered the panel, a sound reached him from the hall, a faint shift fabric brushing lightly against plaster. Someone outside the apartment door, close enough to listen. He stepped softly into the hallway. The faint shadow beneath the door moved. He waited, not breathing. The shadow receded. He did not open the door. Instead, he double-checked the latch, noting the slight distortion along the metal an unfamiliar hand had turned it earlier. Elena. The committee. Someone else entirely. Returning to the desk, he lifted the torn fragment once more. The half-sentences, incomplete symbols, and coded references looked stark in the dim light. The portion he had kept would signal intent if intercepted. The portion left behind would suggest hesitancy. Both were true. He heard the stairwell door open, then close softly without haste. A neighbor returning home or leaving again. But the timing pressed against his thoughts. He folded the torn fragment once, then placed it back on the desk exactly where the overhead light cast a narrow shadow on its corner. Down the hallway, a muted thud. Elena's daughter closing her bedroom door, or Elena shifting a chair. Sounds that belonged to this home, yet tonight felt distant, as though occurring in a parallel space he could observe but not enter. Mikhail sat briefly on the edge of the bed. He stared at the wardrobe, at the panel behind which truths accumulated like dust. There had been years when secrecy had felt simply like a function of duty. Years when he believed he could keep both life paths parallel, neither intersecting dangerously with the other. That time had ended long before he recognized that it had. He stood, put on his coat, and walked toward the door. His hand hovered for a moment above the latch, just long enough for resolve to replace hesitation. He left the apartment without disturbing the torn confession fragment lying on the desk, knowing it would be found. Perhaps not tonight, but inevitably. Elena found the torn fragment on the desk just after dusk. The apartment held the faint warmth of recently extinguished radiator heat, a stillness that felt too deliberate. She approached the desk slowly, as though the air around it carried weight. The fragment lay where the lamplight narrowed into a thin triangle, the pencil strokes sharp against the coarse paper. She lifted it. Half sentences, notations that resembled dates, though incomplete. Initials she did not recognize. A reference to courtyard alternate entry written in the careful shorthand Mikhail used only for official drafts. The lower edge of the page was torn unevenly, as if separated quickly. She folded the fragment once, then slid it into her sleeve. She would examine it later. For now, she needed to understand what he intended by leaving it behind. When she turned toward the hall, she found him standing there. He had returned silently without his coat, as though he had stepped back inside only moments before she entered the room. His posture was straight, his gaze even, but there was a hesitation in the way he held one hand near the doorframe, as if prepared to steady himself. "You opened the drawer again," he said. "You left a page on the desk. A fragment," he corrected. "Not a page." Elena kept her voice level. "Why leave it at all?" He looked past her toward the wardrobe panel. "Some things are better shown gradually." "Shown," she repeated, "not hidden." He didn't respond immediately. The light from the kitchen window cast a faint band across his shirt. He stepped closer, but not enough to close the distance between them. "You've seen more than I expected," he said. "Earlier than I expected." Elena lifted her sleeve slightly, revealing the corner of the torn fragment. "Is this meant for me?" "It was meant to be found," he said. "But not yet." She let a silence sit between them. The household noises of the building drifted through the walls, dishes clinking from a neighbor's kitchen. The distant hum of a radio broadcast a muffled door closing on another floor. Ordinary sounds unchanged while everything inside their apartment shifted. "What are these meetings?" she asked. "The ones in the photographs? The ones in the negatives?" Mikhail's eyes flickered once recognition, not surprise. "You developed them?" "Yes." He exhaled quietly, a breath more tired than defensive. "Then you already know more than any explanation I could offer." "That isn't an answer." He moved past her into the bedroom, opened the wardrobe, and reached for his coat. The lining sagged slightly as he lifted it, revealing a second interior pocket she had never noticed. Something metallic inside shifted with a soft, controlled weight. "Mikhail," she said. He didn't turn. "What did you do?" she asked. He slid his hand into the concealed pocket. For a moment, she expected him to withdraw a letter, a folded document, something that might ground the abstract unease into a specific truth. Instead, the object remained hidden. He closed the coat, smoothing the fabric with deliberate care. "You shouldn't have developed the negatives," he said finally. "What danger are we in?" Elena asked. He looked at her then directly, not evasively. "Is anyone else aware of what you found?" There was no mistaking the significance of the question. Not curiosity, but calculation. "No," she said. "Not the neighbor?" "No." "Not the committee, no." He studied her face as though measuring the certainty in her voice. Something in his expression shifted resolve, tightening around something softer. Regret, perhaps, though he controlled it before it formed fully. He stepped toward her. "Elena," he said quietly, "if anyone asks about the negatives, you must say nothing. You must deny having seen them. You must." A loud knock cut him off. 3 firm strikes, not the rhythm of a neighbor or courier, the same pattern used earlier by the committee. Mikhail's posture changed instantly, still alert, restrained. He glanced at the door, then back at Elena. "Put the fragment away," he said. "Who is it?" "Not now." He stepped into the hallway, but Elena caught his sleeve. "You haven't answered anything." He didn't look at her this time. "If they're here," he said, "you won't want the answers yet." The knock came again, slower this time, but heavier. From the other side of the door, a man's voice spoke calmly. "Comrade Arseniev, we require a moment." Elena felt the quiet between them compress tight, unyielding. Mikhail lowered his sleeve from her grasp and straightened his posture. "Stay in the bedroom," he said. Then he reached for the door. Elena stayed in the bedroom doorway despite Mikhail's instruction. She watched from the narrow angle where the hall light met the darkness of the room. Mikhail opened the door only halfway, positioning his body to block most of the view inside. 2 men stood in the corridor. Not committee members, these carried themselves with a quieter precision. Their coats were unadorned, their shoes clean, their expressions unyielding without appearing stern. The hallway light glinted faintly on a metal clasp one of them held. Comrade Arseniev, the taller one, said, "We have a summons." Mikhail kept his voice neutral. "Issued by whom?" "Internal oversight," the man replied. "We're instructed to review your file and verify certain matters. You will accompany us." The second man's gaze drifted past Mikhail's shoulder, stopping just short of where Elena stood concealed. He didn't lean. He didn't search. He simply let his eyes adjust to the dim interior. Elena stepped further into the shadow, her pulse steady but high. Mikhail closed the door behind him as he stepped into the hall. The latch clicked softly, not fully shut. The taller agent noticed, but said nothing. Elena waited 3 breaths. Then she moved into the hall and pulled the door fully closed just as the agents descended the stairs with her husband between them. Their footsteps echoed through the stairwell, measured even, almost courteous. When the outside door opened, cold air surged upward. Then the building returned to its muted quiet. Elena locked the door. The apartment felt hollow without Mikhail's presence, an absence defined not by emotion, but by the removal of a familiar tension. She walked back to the desk. The torn fragment wasn't where she had placed it earlier. She checked beneath the lamp, beneath the ledger, beneath the pencil. Nothing. She pulled open the drawer. Empty. Someone had taken it. She moved quickly to the wardrobe, pressed the edge of the panel. It lifted. The drawer inside had been disturbed again. The photograph slightly shifted. The coded slip angled the negatives, rewrapped less precisely than before. She lowered the panel and stood in the center of the room, breathing evenly. A knock sounded. Not at the door, at the window. A brief, muted tap from the courtyard side. Elena approached slowly. She lifted the curtain just enough to see the courtyard stones below. A man in a dark coat stood near the entrance archway, hands folded behind his back. Not one of the agents. A different figure. He glanced up not directly at her window, but close enough to signal awareness. The tap came again, lighter this time. Elena looked to the left. A sheet of paper had been slipped between the outer sill and the window frame. She eased the window open by a few centimeters and retrieved it. An official summons. addressed to her. She unfolded it carefully. The language was neutral. You are requested to provide clarification regarding household records and recent irregularities. Cooperation ensures administrative resolution. Failure to comply may result in further review. The date listed was tomorrow morning. No location given, only District Office Room 4. Elena folded the paper again, pressing the crease sharply. When she looked back toward the courtyard, the man was gone. She heard the faintest shift behind her. She turned. Her daughter stood in the hallway, hair slightly disheveled from sleep, hands clasped at her chest. "Where is Papa?" Elena walked to her, knelt, and touched the girl's shoulder. The child's eyes moved past her toward the front door, then toward the wardrobe as though searching for something she could not name. "They needed to speak with him," Elena said. The girl breathed in, once small and tight. "Did he do something wrong?" Elena didn't answer. She brushed the girl's hair back gently, guiding her toward her room. "Get some rest. I'll be here." After the door closed softly, Elena stepped back into the living room. The summons lay folded in her hand. She looked toward the desk, toward the empty spot where the confession fragment had once rested, where someone had taken it. Someone who had already known where to look. She placed the summons beside the lamp, aligning its edges with the base. The apartment lights flickered once, then steadied. Outside, a car door shut quietly. Not abrupt, not hurried. A procedural sound, the kind made when people expect to return. Elena arrived at the district office just after 9:00 a.m., though she had been awake long before dawn. The building's entrance was unmarked except for a fading number stenciled above the door. Inside the hallway smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant. A clerk at a small wooden desk gestured for her to proceed without asking her name. Room 4 stood halfway down the corridor. The door was open only a finger's width, yet the crack felt intentional, an invitation that denied comfort. Elena pushed it open. A single official sat at the table. Not the chairwoman from the housing committee, not either of the men who had taken Mikhail. This was someone new, a man with narrow glasses and a folder already open in front of him. He gestured to the chair opposite. "Thank you for coming, Comrade Arsenyeva." She sat. The chair's legs scraped softly against the floor. "We have some questions," the man said, adjusting a sheet. "Routine clarifications for household record accuracy." He slid the sheet toward her. Elena recognized the layout, a standardized household inventory form. But this version was cleaner than the altered one the committee had shown her. No corrections, no conflicting entries. The man tapped 2 fields with his pen. "These sections differ from your husband's account." Elena kept her gaze steady. "I have not seen his account. Nonetheless, he said your version does not align." She folded her hands loosely. She did not look at the sheet again. The man watched her posture for 3 quiet seconds. "You are aware of your husband's recent activities?" he asked. "I'm aware he has been asked to clarify them." He nodded once, neither satisfied nor disappointed. "We expect cooperation from households in such matters. It preserves order. It prevents unnecessary escalation." The word households pressed subtly, as though everything beyond the door, her daughter, their belongings, the routines of their home, was included in the scope of cooperation. The man turned to a second document. "Last night, a piece of evidence was removed from your residence." Elena's pulse slowed. What evidence? A page? Or part of one? It had been left on a desk. She kept her breathing even. "I didn't remove anything. That is not the question." He leaned back slightly. "Items do not disappear without someone noticing. The question is whether its absence was expected." The phrasing struck her with the precise weight it was meant to carry. Expected by whom? He closed the folder. "We do not require an answer now, but understand this clarity is important. Ambiguity complicates the record. He signaled toward the door, indicating the conversation was over. Elena rose. As she stepped into the hallway, he called softly after her. "Your cooperation will protect your daughter." She did not turn. She walked out of the building into a muted gray light, the cold air settling on her collar. The street felt too open, too exposed. She made her way home through narrower lanes where the buildings stood close enough to shield her from the wind. At the apartment door she paused. A faint indentation marked the dust near the threshold, a shoe print smaller than Mikhail's, not her own. Someone had come and gone. Inside the apartment was quiet. Her daughter sat at the table drawing loops on a scrap of paper with a dull pencil. The girl looked up when Elena entered. "Are they bringing Papa home?" she asked. Elena hung her coat carefully before answering. "I don't know." The girl lowered her eyes to the page, drawing the loops slower now. Circles that wavered, that crossed each other, that looked unintentionally like the coded markings Elena had found on the torn slips. Elena walked to the bedroom. She opened the wardrobe and pressed the loose panel. The drawer inside was nearly empty. The photograph remained, the coded slip, but the negatives, the symbols, the older documents gone. Taken without force, without trace. She lowered the panel and returned to the kitchen. Her daughter had set down the pencil and now watched the window. "Why are Papa's shoes gone?" she asked softly. Elena looked toward the entryway. The empty place on the shoe rack was unmistakable. No residue of melted snow, no impression of recent weight. The absence cut sharply more final than the morning's summons. "They moved his things?" her daughter asked again. Elena knelt beside her. The girl's eyes widened, searching her face for an answer, for some shape of reassurance. Instead, Elena reached for the only object she still possessed, the half-fragment she had hidden deep inside her coat lining. She held it for a moment, feeling its weight light, too light for what it represented. She stood, walked to the stove, and turned on a match. The flame trembled. She fed the fragment into it. The page curled, darkened, and dissolved into ash before the match extinguished. Her daughter watched from the table. Mama Elena brushed the ash into the sink and rinsed it away. "It's nothing," she said. But the truth settled into the room with the finality of cooled air. Mikhail would not return. His records had already been rewritten, and whatever role he had lived beneath their daily life had now passed to silence the kind that households were expected to maintain.